Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you? Genius. Billionaire. Playboy. Philanthropist. So here's the thing. Of all the stuff to brag about in the Marvel Universe, you really shouldn't lead with genius. The superhero job market is absolutely saturated with geniuses. You got green monsters and stretchy guys who have no problem throwing together a rocket or a time machine if the occasion calls for it. And it all seems kind of unnecessary, right? You should appreciate that folk heroes for most of human history weren't genius scientists or inventors. They were cunning and brave warriors who often owed their abilities to the gods of the heavens or nobility in their blood. The 20th century saw the rise of sci-fi and alien superheroes, but it was Marvel who took things a step further. The company introduced an entirely new pantheon of heroes, most of them the flawed genius type, who drew their powers directly from the well of science by way of their own remarkable inventions or radioactive accidents. So, how did this happen? Why does the Marvel movie you're watching seem so entrenched in what we might call pretend science? Well, the answer is here. This is the story of how the Cold War created Marvel's superhero formula. Chapter 1. The Atomic Age and the Birth of Marvel. The Nuclear Reality. What you're looking at is an American atomic bomb test from 1959. 14 years earlier, at the close of World War II, the U.S. dropped 2 of these on Japan. It was the unveiling of civilization's off-switch, a terrifying invention that could render one's enemies extinct in one irradiated fell swoop. The innovation in nuclear weapons that follows occurs amidst the backdrop of the Cold War. The rivalry where the United States moves to limit the Soviet Union's proliferation of totalitarian communism. The U.S. expands its own geopolitical influence while touting the mission of liberal democracy. But in practice, both powers launch invasions the world over, foment revolutions, and frequently prop up regimes that violently suppress opposition. All of this, in a sense, remains secondary to the technological rivalry between the Soviet Union and the U.S., the nuclear arms race. Each missile test and space race rocket launch becomes a show of force, the Sputnik panic. And when the Soviet Union launches the first-ever satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, Americans panic. Politicians like JFK win votes capitalizing on paranoia about a so-called missile gap, the unfounded idea that Soviet weaponry has radically outpaced American capabilities. In 1961, as the dark cloud of nuclear annihilation hangs over the U.S., a company known as Atlas Comics rebrands itself as Marvel, the Fantastic Four and the new hero. Writer-editor Stan Lee brings in this new era with a group of characters called the Fantastic Four. It starts here. The genius rocket scientist Reed Richards finds himself on the front lines of the Cold War space race, and he hastily blasts off into space in order to beat the commies. But on the mission, Reed and his crew are exposed to cosmic rays that endow them with, well, fantastic powers. In this era, it makes a lot of sense to cast a scientist as a hero for the youth. The U.S. government and increasingly American society reconceptualize science as the most important aspect of national defense. The U.S. needs up-and-coming scientific minds to develop stronger nuclear weapons and a capable missile defense system. This sentiment might explain why schools built in the 50s and 60s greet incoming students with images of stars, telescopes, and nuclear explosions. Indeed, the year following the Sputnik launch, the U.S. passes the National Defense Education Act, which pours $1 billion into supporting science at schools and universities. As the House report supporting the bill states, the very survival of our free country may depend in large part upon the education we provide for our young people now. The new pantheon. In this radioactive space age, the saving grace, the righteous heroes, will emerge not from the ranks of valiant infantry, like Marvel's World War II staple Captain America, but rather from the classrooms and laboratories of smart students. Stan Lee and his colleagues seem acutely aware of this cultural shift. He follows up the Fantastic Four with a new character, the atomic scientist Bruce Banner. Banner insists he's a scientist, not a man of action, in what seems a subtle nod to the obsolescence of that very dichotomy. It's Banner's scientific genius and exposure to his own gamma ray bomb that turns him into the Hulk. Many of the big names of Marvel in the early 60s followed the same trajectory. We see the gifted young Peter Parker attend an exhibit on nuclear science, where a radioactive spider bites him and turns him into Spider-Man. And of course, the brilliant and charming arms manufacturer Tony Stark simply invents his own power suit to defeat his Vietnamese communist captors and become Iron Man. Chapter 2: Fighting the Red Menace. Superheroes versus communists. Lest there remain any doubt concerning how exactly an American should harness the fruits of technological innovation, all of these heroes hone their powers fighting communists. Iron Man takes on the Crimson Dynamo and the Soviet femme fatale Black Widow. The Hulk discovers his lab partner Igor is a spy passing atomic secrets to a giant-headed Soviet scientist called the Gargoyle. And Spider-Man's first real villain is a chameleon who, as you might have guessed, is working for the Soviets. He's a spy who can shapeshift to resemble other people and embed himself into American society, a clear reflection of societal fears about Soviet espionage. The reality behind the fear. Given politicians' undemocratic witch hunts for communist sympathizers and jingoistic American propaganda, it's quite easy to dismiss American Cold War fears as the unthinking reactions of an ignorant populace. But these were grave times. Soviet agents were in fact embedded in federal agencies and universities. The American Communist Party and front organizations functioned as the domestic arm of a hostile foreign government, and the world came very close to nuclear war. Children were trained to find cover in the event of a bombing, while their parents watched public service announcements about surviving nuclear apocalypse. Stan Lee reflected on his post-1960 comics. When communism was a big bugaboo here in America, almost all our villains were communists. No matter what the problem was in society at the time, it would sort of show itself in our books. Grounded in reality. If Marvel shows signs of obsession with science and technology, it's because many of its heroes were born out of a culture that could scarcely focus on much else. Marvel's footing in the real world made the heroes icons who dispatched genuine threats and gallantly explored scientific possibility. When the U.S. finally reached the moon in 1969, astronauts disembarked to explore the foreign world and stare back at Earth from the barren rock. Marvel had actually forecasted this event in 1963, with a slight difference. The Fantastic Four touched down on the lunar surface to find none other than an army of communist super apes. Close enough. The legacy. With superhero comics, Marvel promoted the idea that nuclear science could save the Earth. The Cold War created a generation that believed in the power of science and technology to solve humanity's greatest challenges. Whether it was defeating communist threats or exploring space, the answer always came back to innovation, intellect, and the scientific method. Marvel's genius scientists weren't just entertainment. They were aspirational figures for a generation growing up under the shadow of the mushroom cloud. These characters told young Americans that brains could be just as powerful as brawn, that a lab coat could be as heroic as a uniform, and that the future belonged to those who could harness the atom, explore the cosmos, and push the boundaries of human knowledge. The Cold War may have ended, but Marvel's formula endures. Every time Tony Stark upgrades his armor, every time Bruce Banner struggles with his transformation, every time Peter Parker uses his scientific mind to create new web shooters, we're seeing echoes of that anxious, innovative, competitive age when America looked to its scientists to save the world. So that's why your Marvel movies are filled with genius scientists, radioactive accidents, and high-tech suits of armor. It's not just random. It's a direct product of the Cold War era, when science became America's greatest weapon and greatest hope. The genius billionaire playboy philanthropist wasn't born in a vacuum. He was forged in the laboratories and missile silos of the 1950s and 60s, when America bet its future on scientific innovation. The next time you watch a Marvel movie and someone starts spouting technobabble about arc reactors or gamma radiation, remember, that's not just movie magic. That's the DNA of the Cold War, still alive and kicking in our modern mythology. Marvel didn't just create superheroes. They created a generation that believed science could save the world. And in a lot of ways, they were right.